Welcome back to A Lifetime of Mafia Tales. I'm your host, Adrian Martinez, and of course, I'm joined by my co-host, Salvatore Polisi, also known as Sally Ubats. Salvatore and I talk about one of the 10 hitmen he knew during his time in the Mafia. John Gotti is the hitman that we discuss in today's podcast. We talk about how James McBratney was murdered by John Gotti, Angelo Ruggiero, and Ralph Galoni. Sal recalls going to a meeting with Angelo Ruggiero and John Gotti to have a secret meeting with their lawyer to fix this case of James McBratney was a man that had a crew and they were kidnapping mobsters and holding them for ransom money. The one where they went wrong was kidnapping Manny Gambino, which led to James McBratney being killed. Manny was related to the boss of the Gambino crime family, Carlo Gambino. Sal recalls meeting Manny Gambino and he talks about his encounters with him. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interviews like this. Also, if you want more exclusive content, please subscribe to our Patreon channel. One quick thing before we get started with this podcast. This episode is just half of it. The rest of it's on Patreon. If you want to get our full podcast, please subscribe to our Patreon channel. Our Patreon channel link is in the video description below. All right, welcome back, everyone. How you doing today, Sal?
Good.
Well, good to see you again. Another week, we're going to do another episode, and today's going to be a really interesting episode. It's going to be about you meeting John Gotti and your secret relationship with him, and all of the hits and the secret things that he was involved with that you've seen and that you may have been a part of, kind of the McBratney murder, but we don't fully know that. I mean, it's a lot of speculation is what we'll say, but we're going to get into that. We're going to talk about the McBratney murder, and it's going to be interesting, Sal. I mean, this is the year is 1972 up until 1974 is where this episode takes place. So, Sal, take us back to the day you met John Gotti.
Okay, we were I was running the Sinatra Club. We had all kinds of guys coming in. It took a few months that we were getting a lot of traffic. Jimmy Burke was there all the time. Dominic had friends coming in all the time. We had different families involved in gambling. And when we first started in October, November of 71, it was a nickel and dime game. Once Christmas came, we had 2 tables. Then by January, we had 3 poker tables. And the guys that wanted to play for more money sat way in the back, at the dollar table, $2 table, which was not a lot of money then, but for poker players, you could bet. We were playing similar to Texas Hold'em poker. We had different names of the games. When February came out of the blue, Gene Gotti was coming in there, Foxy was coming in there, Tommy came in there, Jimmy Burke. A lot of that group came into the Sinatra Club because it was a good game. And they could also make bets on horses. They could bet on numbers. And we always had stolen merchandise there. And by the time February came, I was bringing in food because we would start a game on Monday night and it would end on Wednesday morning. So when Gotti came in, I didn't even really know him. I knew Gene first, Gene Gotti. And Peter Gotti came in there also. And then he came in to play. He wanted to play poker. I know he talked to Dominic. And from what I remember, I think Dominic gave him like $50 or $100 in chips. Gotti started to play 2 or 3 times a week because we were open just about every night by February, March. Gotti had given me instructions about, how to treat Gotti. And, Charlie Fatico would come in. And it was sort of a quiet respect because they were a different family. So you couldn't get into a lot of deep conversations about crime. It was mostly small talk. Before I could realize what was going on, I had talked with Foxy and I had talked with Dominic about doing some hijacking. And there was a sit-down set up between Dominic Cataldo, John Gotti, Angelo, and Charlie Fatico, and they allowed Foxy to work with me. And then there was another sit-down with Jimmy Burke and Paulie Vario that the 3 of us were going to be allowed to work. So the card game went on all the time. And then we would get information from Jimmy Burke mostly. He was the guy that was the guru in getting information on valuable truckloads of merchandise. One of the first trucks we did was a garment truck, and we hijacked that truck. And Cataldo made arrangements for us to bring the truck um, to Jimmy Burke's secret building. We called it a drop back then. And we brought the merchandise in, and Jimmy negotiated a price. We got paid for it. And then Foxy, I, and Tommy did a truck with suits, men's suits, a lot of suits. This time, we agreed to put it with the Carmine Fatico's building where they would buy it, and that brought another additional problem because once you gave these mob guys the permission to sell your merchandise, you were sort of held hostage. You had to take whatever they said they could pay for that merchandise. So all we did is this truckload of suits. After I let go of the hostages, I went back to where the building was, and Charlie Fatico was there, Foxy was there, and Dominic was there, and they were waiting for a buyer to come. And then John Gotti showed up, and I did write this in the book. We were all picking out suits that were, that we liked. It was like polyester was the style then. And Tommy had a little pile of suits, and then Foxy had 3 or 4 or 5 suits, and I had a few, and then John picked out, a style, and then I know Tommy left for a little while. He went over there and grabbed Tommy's that was the same pattern as his, and he cut up Tommy's suit. And that's when I realized he was so, narcissistic. He didn't want to have anything that anybody else had, or they couldn't have what he had. But we sold the stuff, we got the money, and then we went on to another score. And before you know, we were doing trucks like every other week. Well, that was in 1972. Well, later on, Dominic had a sit down with John. I wasn't there. And everything was arranged that Dominic would be responsible for me. And he went and told Peg Leg Brancato, who was the acting boss of the Colombos after Joe Colombo had got shot, that I was on record with them. And then Gotti said, hey, Foxy's on record with us. Now, Dominic and Gotti were not made members then, 72.
Mm-hmm.
They were just, guys who were waiting in the wings to get made. As we got deeper into the hijacking, Foxy and I pulled off a fur hijacking, and that brought a big problem because we gave it to Charlie Fatico, and Angelo was a little bit involved. He had the tipster. He had a guy named Tootie that had the information on where these furs were up in the Bronx. So we went up there, we cased it, and when the truck came out, we hijacked the truck, and then Tootie ran away right on the scene and almost caused a nightmare for us.
Why did he run?
I don't know, he got scared. He ran away. There was an alarm on the truck.
Oh.
So by the time I dismantled the alarm, Foxy ran away and caught him, and that was when Red Collins was with us. So there was 4 of us on that robbery. And then we gave the merchandise to Charlie Fatico, and then we had a sit down about how much they were going to give us. It was thousands of mink pelts. We should have got like $75,000 or $100,000, but they totally ripped us off, and they said, "Look, we'll give you $25,000." Well, once I went to a sit down with Dominic and Brancato, the boss, he said, "Look, you gave them permission to sell it, and they put it in their building. Now, if you want to take the stuff out of there and go sell it to someone else, they're going to charge you a rental fee of $5,000 a day."
Damn, that much.
Which would have been $25,000 for 5 days.
Yeah, and I remember from last week's episode we had talked about why they didn't like bank robbers. Well, this is why, because bank robbers didn't have to kick up any money or have to stow away. I mean, you just go and run off in the sunset. But with you guys doing truck hijackings and stuff, they needed. I mean, you had to put it somewhere and have someone have a connection to sell it.
So Cataldo instructed me to take the $25,000. We divided it up, and then we started, thinking about doing other robberies, which we did a bunch, and then I got to know John a little bit, because of the nightmare with this guy Tootie. Angelo slapped him around and chased him away. Once you get chased by mob guys, you can't hang out with anybody. They put a label on you that he was a scarecrow. I think he wound up being a low-life guy who killed his wife and went to jail. He was just a crazed guy. But, sit down here and there with Gotti and Cataldo was how it worked. Up until that time, I was working with Foxy and Tommy, and yeah, we did bank robbery. And then sometime, I believe it was in 73, it was after McBratney had been killed. Foxy says, "Hey, we got to go see John. He wants us to do him a favor." I go, "What's the favor?" He says, "Well, I get these rent-a-cars from that girl, and they're in bogus names." I go, "Yeah." He said, "I'm going to go rent a car." I think we got the car, instead of Hertz, we went to Avis. And he put the car in his name. I got to put this car in my name. We've got to go to Florida, and John wants to use the car for the weekend. I go, "So what's the deal?" He said, "I can't tell you." I told Dominic, "Look, Gotti wants me to do him a favor." He said, "I'll go talk to him." I don't know what their conversation was, but the next thing I knew was Gotti instructed us, go rent the car in your name, get airline tickets in your name, go to Miami, stay at the Newport Hotel, which I had been there before, and put everything in your name, stay there for 4 days. Okay, so that's what we did. When we got back, I wasn't able to listen to Foxy talking to John, but what happened was Gotti used the car. They killed somebody. They stuck him in the trunk of the car. They put the car at the airport. And by the time we got back, the car was found with a body in it. And then our attorney, which the attorney I used, Mike Coro, who eventually went to jail. He was one of Gotti's guys. He went in with Foxy to the Queens homicide and showed the evidence that we had an alibi. We were in Florida, and they just let Foxy go. There was no way he could be charged with murder because he wasn't in New York for that weekend. And like I said, I don't know who they killed, but they definitely killed somebody. I had a couple of conversations about that body with Foxy, and Foxy wouldn't even talk about it. So look, you know the rule. You talk with Dominic about your stuff. I talk to Gotti about my stuff and our stuff, and I don't want to talk about it. And that was it. We went on, to robbing, hijacking, diamond robberies, all kinds of stuff. So that was like, and I never had any conversation with John after that incident. And that was sometime after McBratney had been killed. But what I do know is they were catching up with guys who had kidnapped Italian guys and held them for ransom. Now, who that guy was, I don't know. And, as we got into later into 73, Gotti was on the lam. He was hiding out for months.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, I went to my court appearance in Brooklyn with Mike Corio, my attorney, and he said I'd pick him up and drive him. And he said, "Look, we got to go to Staten Island and meet Angelo." Okay, what are we going to do with Angelo? He said, "Look, all we got to do is go meet Angelo. We got to drive to Manhattan, and we're going to meet John." Okay, so I'm just going to drive these guys. I don't know what we're doing. So we go to Staten Island. Angelo makes an appearance on the McBratney murder case, and then we head over to Manhattan. When we get to Manhattan, Angelo goes to a phone booth and makes a phone call and comes back in the car and says, "Okay, we got to go to such and such a street." Okay. And then he's talking about John. Yeah, John's okay. He's there. We're going to go pick him up. So I drive over to this particular street, and John gets in the car, and Mike gives me instructions on where to go. I don't even know where we're going, who we're going to see. But as we get over to the east side, we parked under the building, and Mike had probably been there before. It was Roy Cohn, the famous Roy Cohn attorney. And we go upstairs, And I described it in the Sinatra Club book. There's a whole chapter about it. We go upstairs and we're sitting in this office and we're listening, to him talking about how John was going to get a good deal. The fix was in. He was going to get, take a plea and get 4 years for that killing McBratney. I didn't say a word. When we left, there was some funny stuff that happened. We went downstairs, we by the door, and Cohen embraced Mike Corio and kissed him on each cheek. Then he leaned over and kissed John on each cheek. Then we went outside, and Angelo looked at me and said, "Ubach, don't ever tell anybody that faggot kissed John Gotti." And I never said a word about it. I mean, years later, Roy Cohen, at that time, he was a very famous attorney. There's been books done about him. There's been movies. There's a play. And eventually he became Donald Trump's attorney. So this is the things that, you run into in the life of the mob.
Yeah.
So I went to jail, and John went to jail that same year.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, too, we should give a little context of what the whole James McBratney murder was, who he was, and I think kind of expand on this whole story from your knowledge and why, Gotti went into hiding for the first place and eventually getting sentenced. And, he went, he didn't get much time for it at all.
No. Well, the way I heard it, he was supposedly, nobody really knows the whole story, but it was like he kidnapped this Manny Gambino, which was the nephew of Carlo Gambino. And somehow on the kidnapping, somebody saw his license plate and they tracked him down. And I think Gotti was instructed to go there and kill him. They were probably going to go into the bar, drag him out, and then take him and kill him. But when they got in that bar, the guy was a huge guy, and Gotti and Angelo showed a badge, and McBratney didn't go for it. So they started to drag him out. And the third guy that was with Gotti and Angelo, a guy named Ralphie, he actually cold-blooded killed McBratney. Yeah. And then Gotti and Angelo took off. They worked on all the witnesses. I think it took a year or so. Some of the witnesses identified, some didn't. But they let the thing simmer down. Eventually, there was a fix, and that was the fix that Roy Cohen made with the Staten Island district attorney or judge, whatever it was. I don't know. All I know is that a couple of years later, John Gotti got 4 years in jail. He went upstate New York to a New York state prison, and then he came out, I believe, in the summer of '77.
Yeah, and I think even to expand on it a little more, from what I understand and what I've read, is that Carlo Gambino was the one that had given John Gotti and Angelo Ruggiero the connect with this lawyer. He paid for it, and then he ended up getting murdered before trial, so he didn't even stand trial. But the agreement was, from what I read, is that they were going to become made men in the Gambino family because that was what Carlo had ordered, because this was his, his family, his blood family, and that's something. He's the boss, so he has to set an example.
Yeah, quietly there were guys being kidnapped. Not only Italian wise guys made members, but also drug dealers were quietly being kidnapped and held for ransom, because the last thing a drug dealer want to do is make it public that he paid $200,000-$400,000 to, get released from being kidnapped. Some of these guys were killed, some weren't. That's something I was interested in doing.
I did do a little research on some of the guys that were, the names of them. I think the first one was Frank the Wop. He was the first guy. He was a captain in the Gambino family. The ransom was $150,000, and I think they got it. And then they did a few more. Francisco Manzo, he was a Lucchese capo. Vincent DeMar, Gambino guy. And then, they went on to doing Manny Gambino. And I think, they wanted that, there's different stories and stuff. They say a gambler came in and, that owed Manny Gambino money. And he gave the message to James McBratney. He's like, "Hey, I'll we set this guy up, we'll take care, you take care of him, and I get rid of my debt's gone, and then you got a ransom money. So I really don't know how it all worked out, or from what your understanding was on any of it. But I mean, what do you think? I mean, from the stories that you hear, what do you believe?
I don't know. I mean, a lot of it's so rumor.
Mhm.
I do remember that early on, like late 71, early 72, Foxy and I would go to this place, this little nightclub called Sebastian's, and it was owned by this guy, Tommy Agro, a friend of Cataldo's. And I remember clearly, if I didn't remember how pretty the girl was, I remember meeting Manny, and he had this blonde girlfriend. And then Cataldo told me that's Manny Gambino, Carlo Gambino's nephew. So I think we might have run into him one or two times, but that was before he got kidnapped. Naturally, I don't know the background of all of that.
What kind of guy did he seem like? I mean, what did he,
Quiet,
quiet?
quiet guy. Yeah, he was a quiet guy, well dressed.
Did you hang out? I mean, when you're hanging out with him at this club, I mean, I think you said you guys would just drink. I mean, kept it
Yeah.
casual, mob talk, just.
Yeah, there was very little interaction. I mean, because Cataldo and I sat at one table, and he was at another table. But
Mhm.
Foxy did know him.
Yeah, both Gambino guys, I suppose.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, at that point in time, was he just an associate, Manny, or I mean,
I
he
don't
would.
know what he was. I didn't pay attention. Back then you didn't ask, you didn't know if somebody spoke up, that was okay. I mean,
Mhm.
unless there was going to be a sit down, you wouldn't know who's who.
Right. So I mean, you would hang out with him, and he had a. You guys would meet flight attendant women and shit stuff there too
Yeah,
at this bar, didn't you?
yeah. There was the load. We were always over there looking. It was a place where a lot of flight attendants went. It was in Forest Hills, near Forest Hills, area in Queens, and it was a nice little club.
And Dominic, he's the one that gave you the information about all the kidnappings, right? Cataldo.
Yeah, yeah, he mentioned it. Yeah, they didn't get any Colombo guys for some reason. Maybe they didn't think the Colombos had money. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, they definitely seemed like they were going after the Gambinos hard. I mean,
Yeah,
the Lucchese's as well, but I mean, the Gambinos are just
yeah,
over and over and over. But I mean,
yeah.
these guys, they formed this plan, and James McBratney and his crew, and they're like, okay, we'll go rob the gangsters. They can't go to the
Right,
cops. I mean,
right.
what they can't. They're criminals. They can't do nothing. But I mean,
Yeah.
when you're doing that, robbing gangsters, and there's gonna be, you know,
Eventually, yeah,
yeah, there's gonna be some kind of retaliation, man. And you're gonna have a lot of people looking for you
yeah.
on the
So
street.
my relationship with Gotti, after he went to jail, I went to jail. When I came out, um, the only thing that I was in contact with Angelo, and I was concerned about, what while I was in jail, Tommy had killed Foxy. And I was concerned because at one point I wanted to get revenge. But as I got toward the end of my term in the summer of 75, I spent time with a capo named Icavetti, and he had instructed me, look, you know what? Don't don't think you're going to kill him. But once you pull the trigger, you can't take it back. And we were actually in the new holding facility, Metropolitan Correction Center, and I was partners with Dave Icavetti playing pinochle. And no, unbelievable as may seem, Jimmy Burke had Tommy DeSimone as a pinochle player. But Tommy was a terrible card player. He was impulsive. He couldn't remember the cards. And we would play for push ups. So most of the time, if Jimmy and Tommy lost, Jimmy would do the push ups because Tommy wasn't very physical. He was skinny and, he just wasn't a physical guy. But I put up with him in prison for a couple of months and didn't say a word. Then when I got out in 75, he was still in. And of course, I got into the car business, the drug business. Eventually, in late 78, maybe a couple of months before they did the Lufthansa robbery, Tommy came to my Corvette shop and asked me if I was interested in, going on a heist. I said, no, I'm not doing any more heists. Foxy's gone. That's not what I'm doing. And then eventually he went and they did that heist on Lufthansa. But at that point,
Wait, so you could
uh,
have been a part of the Lufthansa heist?
I probably could have, but because I was good at what I did. at that point, I was already making a lot of money with drugs. I was really staying away from mob guys because you didn't want anybody to know you were dealing drugs. It was still this, secret thing like you deal drugs, you get killed.
Hmm. Well, I mean,
Uh,
it's probably a good thing that you stayed away from that heist. The
yeah,
Goodfellas movie, I think that's the one that they based the whole thing off of. They all the people ended up getting killed at the end, but I don't know how true that was. The members or participants, them and their
yeah.
wives and shit. But probably a good one to stay away from.
I did have one interaction with Gotti in '78.
Hmm.
He had come home in '77, and occasionally Dominic Cataldo's brother Joey, who baptized my son, we would go out, and then after hours we would stop at the Bergen because they had a little bar in there and have a drink. So Cataldo, Dominic Cataldo, he knew we would hang out, Joey Cataldo and myself. And Joey had a cane. He was injured when he was working as a longshoreman. And we went in one night to the Bergen, and as we got there, Gene Gotti was there, and a guy named Red Rhode Island Red. His name was Gomes, Robert Gomes, big tall guy, about 6'2". He was a hitman from Rhode Island, and Gotti had met him in prison and invited him down to Queens to work as a bodyguard for Gotti. Okay.
Yeah.
So we were having a drink, and he was abusive, and he made fun of my friend Joey. And Joey said, "Look, you know what? We got to go. You're pretty abusive." He was drunk. He said, "Get the hell out of here. I'll break you, and I'll break that cane over your head." I approached him. I picked him up. He was a big guy, much bigger than me. I dropped him on the ground, and I beat the living daylights out of this guy while Gene Gotti watched. And from the inside of the Bergen, we worked our way out to the curb. And he had long hair. He was partially bald. I had him by the hair, and I was banging his head on the curb, and he was bleeding. His ear was hanging. And then Joey Cataldo and I left. The next day, Dominic called me, "Come over right away. We got trouble." I go, "What's the trouble?" "Well, what did you get into over there at the Bergen?" "I got a call from John." I go, "Really?" So when I went to see Cataldo, I explained everything that happened. His brother explained everything that happened. And now we're going to have a big sit down.
Hmm.
We had to bring Peg Leg Brancato there, and Dominic and myself and Joey on one side of the table. On the other side was Charlie Fatico, John Gotti, Angelo, and this guy, Red. This guy, Rhode Island Red, Gomes. And, he was all beat up and his eyes were closed. I mean, I really battered this guy. And then the sit down, John ran the sit down and listened to all the stories. Of course, Gene Gotti told the truth that this guy was, abusive. And then so John had us go to the head of the table and shake hands
Right.
because, this guy, Robert Gomes, he wanted to have another fight.
Oh my God.
Cataldo said, "What are you going to do? Use guns, bats, knives, what?" And then Gotti said, look, his line was, "Look, disrespect got us here, and we got to respect each other, shake hands, and let's forget this," because the guy was drunk and abusive.
Yeah.
So that sit down was sort of like a win for the Colombo guys, And
Yeah.
that was it. I would see the guy around once in a while, but he didn't want any part of me. I mean, I was 210 pounds there. I was pretty violent, So that was the
Wow.
sit down I had with Gotti.
Hmm.
And then that was around '78. Well, my relationship with him was very minute. I mean, I didn't get to see him too much. I mean, then around 1979, 1980, I had this little gold store I opened up. And I had already been in conflict with Fat Andy because Fat Andy's grandson was my nephew. My sister-in-law had a baby with Fat Andy's son, Albert. And Fat Andy came in waving a gun in my gold store one day. And we got into a verbal argument. And he threatened to take over my store. So I went to Cataldo and told him what happened. He said, "Well, you got to go see John." Right around this time, now it's like 1979, I think. I go to the Bergen and I see Peter and I go, hey, where's John? He's, oh, he's not here. I go, I want to talk to him. I got a serious problem. Well, you got to make an appointment. I go, an appointment? What is he, a U.S. senator or what? I go, where is he? He's around the corner. Let me go ask him. So he walks around the corner, he goes in, talks to John. He comes back out and says, come on, we'll go see John. I go in and I see Gotti, and he's got this barber chair set up, table. It's a nicer little club than the Bergen, and just one or two guys there. And I explained what happened with Fat Andy. And I said, I know Fat Andy back to 68, 69. He never liked me because I was booking in his neighborhood, but he couldn't do much about it because I was with Dominic and the Colombo guys. He said, look, I'll talk to him. And off I went. I shook hands with John. I went. Maybe a month or two later, I saw John, ran into him, and I said, well, whatever happened, I never saw Andy again. Well, I think Fat Andy was on the lam then. So, but he had opened up, his partner had opened up another gold store. So they were trying to take over the whole neighborhood buying gold. But I never heard another word from Fat Andy again. And John, by that time, had become a captain. My relationship with him was very, cool. I mean, I didn't see him much, although when in the fall of 1979, I was coaching football, and Peter Gotti's son was on my Pop Warner team. They were 12 years old. My son, a couple other wise guys, kids were on the team, and Frankie Gotti came to get on our team. The problem was when he went to weigh in, he was overweight, and the coach said, you can't make the weight. You can't be on the team. He went home and told his mother and Gotti, and Gotti was really mad. Next thing I know, Gotti comes down to the field. And I said, well, let me talk to this guy and see if we can get Frankie another way in. He said, no, it's okay. He's not going to play football. But I'd like to kill that coach. I go, what?
Wow.
I said, look, Peter's on the team. My kid's on the team. Maybe you could talk to him about getting Frankie back on the team. So he took a walk with the coach. I didn't hear what they were talking about. The following day or a couple of days later, the coach knew I was a pretty good football coach. I was allowed to call the plays for our team, and because he was a terrible football coach and he was a probation officer, so nobody liked him. But that was one of the last times I had any interaction with John until a few years later, when I had my jewelry store, and that's another story.
And so you've seen this pattern though of his murderous side. I mean, this rage, and I mean, you never seen him kill anyone, but I mean, you've seen all these violent acts and things that were happening and stories you were hearing from the guys you were around. So, I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. He was
very charismatic. John had a great big personality. He was convincing. He had a humorous side to him, but he also had a cold side that a lot of people didn't see. Of course, a couple of years later, when I got busted for the drugs, I went over to the club over there, and man, anybody who was busted for drugs, he wouldn't even talk to you. So
that was it, because he lived by the rules. I mean, he died in prison.
Yeah. Well, he lived by the rules, but he was also shaking down a lot of drug dealers. They were giving him money by that time. That was 84. And, 84, he was a captain. He had a big crew. They were making a lot of money. By that time, Sammy was involved with them, even though I didn't know Sammy, because I had left New York City. I had moved upstate New York 2 years earlier, in 1982. But there is one other story eventually I'd like to tell. Can't reveal it now. I got this new book coming out. It's in the book, and it's a great story about Gotti, and I'm sure we'll get to it. But I did know how manipulative and how charismatic he was. He could talk anybody into anything. I'm telling you, he could sell Chinese cars to Lee Iacocca. I mean, he would sell ice to Eskimos. He was a very convincing guy.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's just, I mean, with that personality, I mean, he really used it in his favor, because he became the boss. I
Right.
mean, he was
Right.
able to convince guys and win them over for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I mean, you were friends with him for a while, and I
Yeah.
mean, we were close as somewhat. I mean, you weren't, in the same family, but
Right.
as much as it would go. But I mean, he wanted to bring you into the family at one point as well, right?
Yeah. He tried to talk Cataldo into letting me come over to his group, and Cataldo says, no, he's been with us for years. He's staying with us. And of course, Cataldo and I were drug dealers. And nobody knew that. And Cataldo was never busted for drugs. Never. He was really careful. But that was another guy who did a lot of killings. And we'll talk about Cataldo as one of the 10. We'll talk about, Roy DeMeo. We'll talk about these guys that I met that I got to know who they were. I got a real handle on their personalities.
Yeah, I
Now,
mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, this is our first one that we did. It's on John Gotti. I mean, everybody likes to hear the John Gotti stories. I mean, so
right.
I mean, we're gonna segue into more guys. It's gonna be
Yeah.
a really interesting series how we do it, but it all goes into depth about you being there and being around these guys. I
Yeah.
mean, people can write books and everything, but it's like you were there. That's the whole reason we're doing this, is because this is what makes it unique.
Yeah.
Your side of the story.
Yeah. Some of that, I did a scam, and sort of John was involved in it. We'll talk about that after my book gets published, or maybe as it's getting published, we'll talk about it. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I did have a real handle on who he was. He was very charismatic. He was convincing, and everybody learned, who he became.
Yeah, I mean that's true. I mean, you also brought up Sammy too, and just a little fun side note. I was going to say we have our Instagram page, and he liked one of your videos that you had talked about Dominic Cataldo and the whole luncheonette deal where Sammy the Bull's friend was killed by Dominic. But so people
He
are
he,
seeing our stuff.
he mentioned that.
He didn't mention it, but he liked it. Like there was
Oh,
you can like stuff, but
yeah.
no, I mean, it'd be interesting. Maybe one of these days we'll see. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I left as because he was with the Columbos, Sammy, originally.
oh yeah, I remember that.
And then he moved over to the Gambinos. But, John knew all kinds of wise guys all over New York City, and guys that you never knew, that he just had a pulse on it, man. He just knew. And my circle was very small because of being a drug dealer. I wasn't interested ever after I got out of prison thinking about getting made, because that was the easy way to get yourself killed. And then
Yeah.
you were under somebody else's control. I was more of a maverick, and that's what I like doing. I like making my own money, not giving it away, because I always thought, well, you know what? If you commit the crime, you're going to go do the time. No one's going to do the time for you. So why give away your money? And I
Not
found ways to make money without giving them our money. And I
yeah.
mean, Cataldo used me to store his heroin,
Wow.
and I was telling my wife, I don't often tell her too much, but Cataldo was detailed about killing. I mean, he instructed me what I was supposed to do. We'll talk about it one day, about picking up a body and how to dispose of it. I mean, he was really slick when it came to that. So
Yeah, and Gotti, he with going back to him. I mean, it just the whole fact that you were able to meet him before he was up. I mean, you could see that his personality was really changing over the time
Oh
because
yeah.
yeah, like you said, you try to go into his office and Gene or whatever said, you got to make an appointment with him. I mean,
Peter.
Peter, yeah, and you could see that he was leveling up during that time. I mean, he was really taking it to a whole nother level. I mean, but at the same
Yeah.
time, he was always on that rage, that mindset.
I knew Peter well because his son, Peter Gotti Jr., was my right guard on my Pop Warner team. So I mean, I knew them well, man. I had other guys that were burglars. I had a famous drug dealer. He's doing life now. A guy named Mark Ryder. Greg Ryder was his son. All these guys were around Gotti. Gotti drew all the characters, and they went and did a lot of time. These guys. I mean, John Caniglia got 50 years. Gene Gotti got 50 years. Mark Ryder got life for drugs. I mean, he's still in there. If you look him up, he's tried to get out, and the government's afraid that he might kill somebody. So now he's my age, and he's been in there, about 39 years, 40 years.
Yeah, it's a long time. I mean, we talked about Gotti being involved with drugs. I mean, you said he wasn't ever like selling it, but he would extort these people. He would extort the dealers, and that's a way to get the money, legitimately in the mafia world. And I've read books of other mafia guys, and they did the same thing.
He would tell people he would protect them, in a lot of ways in the street, because there's other perils in the street, other dangers. And so if you got a mob guy that's sort of like in your corner, so you take advantage of that,
Yeah. Even though, I mean, how was that looked on, I guess? Because if you're offering protection to drug dealers, is that okay in the mob world?
Well, if you went to jail for drugs, came out, and then you said you were giving it up, or you never got busted for drugs, that would be okay. But he didn't. I mean, there was guys that I was in Lewisburg with that were drug dealers that Gotti got a hold of when they came out. I mean, Big Arnold Squitieri, oh my gosh. He was older than Gotti, I think, maybe a couple of years. He just died recently. He was a major, major drug dealer. And so Angelo was friends with him. We were in prison together in Lewisburg. There was a whole group of guys from Harlem. They called them the Purple Gang. They were there. They all knew Gotti. Yeah. And these guys were big-time drug dealers, made millions of dollars.
Damn.
Gotti took advantage of the money they made.
What about like offering protection? Like you said, I mean, he would offer protection to these guys, right? These drug dealers is what he would.
Yeah, he would tell them, look, I'm going to put you with me on the record. No one else can mess with you. You're with me. Yeah. And so whatever they gave him, I don't know, but they probably kicked up money to him.
But in the mafia world, that was legit. Yeah. He could do that. He could protect drug dealers, but as long as he wasn't selling it.
Yeah, because he had a whole army behind him. I mean, people don't realize. I mean, it'd be like looking at Spartacus, the movie. Yeah. I had an army behind him. It was amazing. And Sammy came along. I don't think John Gotti knew anything about shaking down unions, really. And Sammy came along and made him a lot of money. Don't forget, Gotti was acquitted March 13th, Friday the 13th, 1987. He didn't go into jail until 1992 when he got convicted. He had 4 or 5 years on the street. Could you imagine all the money they were kicking up to him?
A lot.
Yeah.
Millions, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Millions.
So, pretty interesting.
Yeah. I hope everyone enjoyed this episode. It was really interesting for me as well, doing the research and figuring out this whole James McBratney deal and how John Gotti was involved with Angelo, Ruggiero, and Ralph. It's all kind of weird how Ralph ended up dying as well. Didn't even make it to trial, but history goes and John Gotti became the boss and Angelo was right up there with him, so they were just looking to make their bones. Sal has a really interesting memory when he recalls these stories. It's weird to think that Sal was involved with all these guys, man. It really is. Please comment any key takeaways that you got from this interview. Please share it with anyone that you think will enjoy this type of content. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to get more interviews like this, and please subscribe to our Patreon channel if you even want more exclusive stuff like live chats with Sal, commenting back and forth, texting him, and other videos that we post on there that we don't post on YouTube. We're also selling autographed books of Sal's Sinatra Club on our website. You can also find the Sinatra Club cards that were played in the Sinatra Club on there as well. It'll be in the video description. It's all on my clothing website. So if you want to support my clothing brand as well, please feel free to. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next week.